Okay, so have you ever wished there was a way to, like, give your brain a little nudge towards, I don't know, being more mindful?
It's a thought, isn't it? Kind of like a shortcut to inner peace.
Right. And that's actually what we're diving into today. We're looking at some research on this idea of priming. Basically, it's whether you can subtly influence someone's behavior without them realizing it.
Right, almost like subliminal messaging, but for, well, in this case, mindfulness.
Exactly. And the researchers, get this, they wanted to see if priming people with mindfulness could actually make them less aggressive.
Which is a fascinating idea, right? Because
Yeah.
we often think of mindfulness as this way to find more peace, more calmness.
Yeah, like less likely to snap at someone in traffic, more likely to take a deep breath instead.
Exactly. So the researchers use this clever word scramble task.
Word scramble. Like, how?
Yeah, so people saw these jumbled sentences, and hidden within them were words related to mindfulness.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of words?
Things like present moment or non-judgment. The idea was that even if people weren't consciously thinking about these words,
Just seeing them might spark something.
right, precisely, they hoped it would activate that mindful state, even subconsciously.
Okay, I'm hooked, but be honest, did it work? Did people magically transform into Zen masters?
Well, the first round of research, not quite the results they expected.
What do you mean?
They didn't see a big change in overall aggression levels just from the priming.
Oh, so much for that easy mindfulness hack.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
You can't leave me hanging. What's the catch?
They noticed something strange when they looked at people with different levels of self-control.
Self-control. Okay, now I'm even more confused. What does that have to do with anything?
So people who were normally very good at keeping their cool, those with high GH self-control,
Yeah.
they actually became more aggressive after the mindfulness priming.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that telling someone to chill out, even subtly, could make them more likely to lose it?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally. It's like the
Like-
opposite of what you'd expect. So how is that even possible?
Well, one theory is that for those folks who are usually really good at holding back the mindfulness priming, it might have been like giving them permission to loosen up a bit.
Because they're usually so busy keeping everything in check.
Exactly. Like, okay, if you say so, I'll let go a little. And because they're normally USO controlled, that release actually led to more aggression.
Wow. So in a way, the mindfulness nudge backfired.
In a sense, yeah. It's like they accidentally gave a green light to be a little less restrained, but only for those who were already good at restraining themselves.
That is wild. Did they just call the whole experiment off at that point, worried they created a mindfulness monster? I mean, they couldn't just end the research there, right? With that cliffhanger.
Oh, definitely not. They had to see what was going on. So they did 2 more studies
Makes sense.
to try and replicate this weird thing they found with self-control and aggression.
So round 2 of the mindfulness experiment, same results. The folks who are usually calm and collected, did they become even more aggressive after the mindfulness priming?
Actually, no, not exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, they couldn't quite get that same result again, like the connection just wasn't as strong.
Huh. Interesting. So what happened? Did they just throw their hands up and say, mindfulness is a mystery?
Well, they even tried measuring mood and hostility. Just thinking maybe those aggressive effects were just too subtle to see if they only focused on outward actions.
Right, like maybe the priming did something, but it was more about how people were feeling inside rather than how they were acting outwardly.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, no dice.
So after all that, what's the verdict? Is mindfulness priming a bust? Are we back to square one?
Not so fast. It's not quite that simple. You see, they realized that the specific type of priming they used, quick and unconscious, like in those word scrambles, it might not be that effective for changing how we act towards others.
Okay, so no making people instantly kinder just by slipping in a few be present messages.
Not quite. But here's where it gets really interesting, especially for our listener.
On all ears.
There's been other research on this kind of priming. And that research found it did seem to help people deal with their own stress and struggles. The stuff we deal with internally.
Hold on, let me get this straight.
Yeah.
So you're saying mindfulness priming might not stop me from getting annoyed at someone who cussed me off in traffic, but it could help me deal with that frustration I feel inside.
You got it. It's like instead of trying to change the world around us, this type of priming might be more about shifting how we relate to our own inner world.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. It's like, it's one thing to not yell at the barista who messed up my coffee order, but it's another thing entirely to deal with that annoyance I feel bubbling up inside,
Exactly. And that internal shift, that's where the potential of mindfulness might really be. Think about it. When you're stressed and that inner voice starts going into overdrive.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. Well, this kind of priming, it could be a way to help dial down that inner critic a bit.
Interesting. So instead of aiming to become some kind of Zen master, maybe it's more about, like, learning to handle our own inner weather patterns a bit better.
I love that analogy. It's not about erasing difficult emotions entirely, but maybe, just maybe, this kind of priming could help us ride those waves a little more smoothly.
Okay, so mindfulness priming. Potentially helpful for dealing with my own anxieties and frustrations, but not so much for turning me into some kind of aggression-proof superhero.
Precisely. It's more about fine-tuning our internal response to the world rather than trying to control the world around us.
This is quite the roller coaster ride, I gotta say. First, I'm told mindfulness could help me be less aggressive. Then it's potentially the opposite. And now, it's all about turning inward.
What can I say? The human brain is a mysterious and wonderful thing. But what's really fascinating is that it shows just how powerful even subtle influences can be on our minds. We might not even be aware of them, but they can still have an impact.
Yeah, it's like when a certain smell suddenly brings back a vivid memory.
Right. Our brains are constantly making connections, picking up on cues, and this research, it suggests that maybe, just maybe, we can tap into that for something as beneficial as mindfulness.
So where does that leave us? If just unscrambling a few sentences with the word mindfulness isn't going to cut it, what can we actually do to tap into those benefits?
Yeah.
Especially for dealing with all that inner stuff.
It does seem like there are no real shortcuts to mindfulness.
Yeah, no easy hacks for enlightenment today, huh? But, okay, so let's say just saying present moment a bunch of times isn't enough. Then what can we actually do to, experience those benefits? Especially when it comes to dealing with, like, our own internal world and all that.
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And while this particular research didn't really give us a step-by-step guide, it did shine a light on something really crucial about mindfulness.
Okay, I'm listening. What is it?
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Meaning?
What works for one person to find that sense of mindfulness, it might be totally different for someone else.
Okay, so no judgment if my ideal meditation space involves more coffee than a monastery. Got it.
Exactly. The key is really about finding what helps you personally access that state of presence, that non-judgmental awareness. Maybe for you, I is traditional meditation. Or maybe it's something else entirely. Like taking a walk in nature, getting lost in some music, or even diving into a creative project.
I love that. It's about finding those moments of mindfulness that actually fit into our real lives, not some rigid thing we force ourselves to do.
Exactly. And it got me thinking about how, even though this research was all about unconscious priming, maybe there's something to be said about being more intentional, more conscious about creating an environment that naturally encourages mindfulness. Think about it. If we're constantly bombarded by chaos and noise, it's going to be that much harder to tune into that inner peace, right?
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like being mindful of not just our internal state, but also our surroundings, our schedules, even what we choose to watch or listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Are we giving ourselves the space for that quiet reflection, or are we just constantly bombarding our senses?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. And, this might sound a bit cliche, but this research really highlighted for me that mindfulness, it's not really a destination. It's more of a practice.
It's the journey, not the arrival, right?
Exactly. It's not about somehow reaching this perfect state of mindfulness 24/7 and then you're done. It's about cultivating a certain way of being. And yeah, there are going to be times when we're feeling super present and aware, and other times when, well, our minds are just racing. It's totally human. I think the key is to approach it all with a sense of curiosity and kindness, not judgment.
I love that. Well, as we wrap up our deep dives into the world of mindfulness and aggression and, honestly, the incredible power of our own minds, I think if there's one key takeaway here, it's this.
What's that?
Mindfulness, it's a journey, and it's definitely a journey worth taking, even if it doesn't always go exactly as we might expect. It's about exploring our own inner world, understanding how our minds work, and then figuring out what practices, what tools actually help us navigate all of life's ups and downs with, a little bit more grace and awareness.
Yeah.
No brain hacks required, just honest self-exploration.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Actually, you'll excuse me, I'm feeling that urge for a little mindful gardening. Apparently my basil plants could use a little less judgment and a lot more presence.